This is Karen, Coach's Corner Chats, and on the podcast today, I have Frank Barone and special guest co-host Tyler Wickham. Frank, where are you at and what are you up to?
Thanks, guys, for having me here. Currently, I am at Angel City Football Club. We just finished our inaugural season in the NWSL, so pretty exciting stuff. My role there is head of football conditioning, so kind of the middle ground between the technical staff and the performance staff, and trying to manage that relationship between the two.
Is this your first experience at the professional level?
It's my second at the professional level, first in the women's professional game. So prior to my last role, which was at the University of Pittsburgh, I was at San Antonio Football Club in the USL. So I was there for just under 2 years. And so, yeah, I worked in the USL prior to that.
Why soccer? Why get into this side of things? What kind of brought you to this kind of form of conditioning and strength training?
Yeah, I played soccer all growing up. I played all through my youth, and then had an opportunity to go to University of Buffalo, where I played for a couple of years, and then transferred after a couple injuries and wanting a different experience to a Division III school down in North Carolina. At that time, I still played through the rest of my college career, and I was an exercise science major. Right towards the end of the year, or towards my time in college, it was that middle ground between, do I want to be a soccer coach? Do I want to be a performance coach? Strength and conditioning coach is more common nomenclature. And through just the experiences that I had on the intern side, I went with the strength and conditioning. But just because of my background in soccer, I've always been with Soccers, which is a passion of mine. So I've never shied away from those opportunities. So in the college game at Robert Morris, I worked with men's and women's soccer. At University of North Carolina, I worked with everybody, but also men's and women's soccer were two that I spent the most of my time with. To then obviously the opportunity with San Antonio Football Club under Andy Thompson. So the reason that role was such a good opportunity for me, and something I really enjoyed, was my gift when I graduated from my roommate and one of my best friends, Chris Kovasmark, who's a Norwegian player that I played with, was Raymond Verheijen's football periodization. So that was like my graduation gift. Like, hey, think you'll enjoy this, which obviously, for better or worse, set me on this path. And Andy Thompson, who was the director of performance at San Antonio Football Club, is as part of the expert courses that Raymond puts on. He's one of the leading experts in football periodization. So I got the education from one of the best in the world. And our first conversation was, my interview was us chatting football periodization, and me at least having the right frame of reference and not sounding like too much of a meathead, which set me on the right course, and has really moved me to where I want to be, which is not just a strength and conditioning coach, but somebody who can speak across all the departments. As a football conditioning coach, and seeing football as a starting point, and then strength and conditioning as a lens that you can see football through. So that's where I like to sit right now.
What's the steps that you take to get that first, like you brought up Robert Morris and UNC. UNC has a huge history of like really, really good soccer on both the women and men's side. How do you go about getting that opportunity, and what was that experience like with Anson Dorrance and that working with that staff?
So strength and conditioning, the reality is you work for free for a long time, which isn't too far off from a lot of soccer coaches, right? So my first opportunity in university was at the university. I was at Methodist. I worked with football. I worked with American football for a semester. Then over the summer, between my last year of college, I worked at North Carolina Central University, which is a HBCU in Durham, North Carolina. I worked with football, basketball, baseball, whoever was around over the summer, to complete my last semester of college. And then I actually got an internship at Robert Morris University. So again, all of that year and a half, 2 years was working for free. I interned at Robert Morris for 6 months, and then got a a part-time job at Robert Morris, which S&C coach means you're making like $8,000 a year or something like that, and working 60 hours a week. And then that transitioned itself into an opportunity at UNC. One of my former teammates at University of Buffalo, Tom Beckfermit, was in the part-time position there. When he moved on, he recommended me. So my role at UNC was a part-time assistant strength and conditioning coach. So I had a few teams to my own, but then, I would assist a lot of the other teams. And obviously with my background, the easiest one to put me with immediately was men's and women's soccer. And so I worked under Greg Gatz, who's been with men's and women's soccer for 19 years, maybe 20 years now, and got to work with him and be a part of both of those staffs. And so that was, really how that all worked. Obviously, the experience at UNC was amazing. I mean, I arrived at a point at UNC where obviously, they're incredibly established university when it comes to men and women's soccer, and really just got the time to soak in just about everything around. The culture that Anson's built obviously is incredible. At the time, Raymond started to work with UNC. And so that was another kind of interesting wrinkle into all of this was, Raymond doing some courses down in Raleigh, and, the staff being a part of those courses, and then, learning and starting to put in some of the, some of the principles into, changing how they train and how they prepare. So it was definitely not driven by me anywhere near it, but just to, soak all that in at that time of my career, which was pretty early on, before I got a chance to really see how it's done, at the top level under Andy at San Antonio. So yeah, it was a really important part of my career, and something I'm still have a lot of relationships with all the players and coaches, and I'm really, really lucky to have had that.
You just brought up the relationship idea. How important is that to be connected with the coaches, the players, all that, even beyond the conditioning sessions themselves?
Yeah, I think if you don't start there, you're doomed. I'm not aloof to the fact that I normally have it easier when speaking to soccer coaches because of the language that I'm able to speak, and I can see the game, and there's tends to be a more mutual respect immediately off of that. Whereas other colleagues who are strength conditioning coaches, who are phenomenal coaches, they get painted immediately as like, oh, you don't know soccer, you can't have this conversation. It's also not lost on me that many coaches have that soccer coaches have that experience, that they have a strength coach who doesn't know anything about soccer and wants to just do whatever they want, and aren't able to see the game. So again, I've been lucky, but also I think I've positioned myself in a way that it becomes easier to have these relationships and conversations because of the way that I see the game. I worked with swimming at University of Pittsburgh. That relationship wasn't as easy. I don't speak the language of swim. I can take a step back and look at the sport and, figure it out and understand the muscle actions and, the biomechanical requirements and the, energy system requirements. But at the end of the day, I don't speak the language. So that required some time to really, develop that relationship, or not have the time to develop that relationship. And it just doesn't work out in that way. The same way that I know maybe you two, either at previous places or where you are now, may have that experience with strength coaches. So again, I think I've been lucky, but it's a concerted effort to make sure that you're speaking the language and trying to meet people where they are, rather than just say, this is what we're doing, and it's not even a conversation at that point.
So Frank, I listened to you on Jake Tura's podcast, what seems like forever ago, and he referred to you like 4 or 5 times, where people have referred to you as like the soccer strength guy. Like, you're more of a soccer coach than you are a strength guy, because like you said, typically we meet the strength and conditioning coaches who don't have a background in soccer. They're typically American football guys, or every now and then you'll get like a baseball or a basketball or a wrestler. Do you think that's a problem in the academia world? It's like the process in becoming a certified strength coach, or do you think the next evolution in strength coaches is to be sport dominant, but then have the background also with the strength conditioning as well?
Yeah, God, I can't remember who it was. It's going to escape me. I'm just blanking on the name. He wrote Governing Dynamics of Sport.
James Smith.
Yes, James Smith. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
At some point he wrote, or it was in a podcast, I don't remember what it was, but he said it's going to be a lot easier for sport coaches to learn enough about strength and conditioning that they can be, that they can essentially take this over than it is for strength coaches to learn about a sport. And I do agree with that. I think that, the breadth of knowledge it takes to be a sport coach means that you're taking in a lot more information than being a strength conditioning coach. I think to be a sport coach, you tend to have this, this breadth of knowledge across a lot of different spaces, or you should, at very least, have that breadth of knowledge across a lot of different spaces. And then you become kind of that T, that they speak about in the book range. Like you want to be the T, you want to be across, but you want to have something that you can dive really deep down into. So I see that as a lot easier with sport coaches learning about the strength conditioning and energy system. But at the same time, I believe that the best performance coaches are the ones who really dive deep into the sport. I'm lucky that I just love football and I love to talk about football and learn about football. And I've worked under some amazing coaches, where I've just got to learn some incredible things at San Antonio under Andy, and with Darren Powell and Alan Marcina, who's now, in the Western Conference, or in the USL final with San Antonio Football Club. Like I got to sit in an office with them and Nick Evans and Juan La Madrid at San Antonio. And then at Pitt, Randy Waldrum has won national championships at Notre Dame. They're a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Shout out Pitt women's soccer. Which is some like truly amazing things. And then obviously Jay Vidovich at Pitt on the men's side is arguably the most storied coach in NCAA history, and what he's done at Pitt is unbelievable. So I've got to work with some pretty incredible people where they've afforded me the opportunity to learn more from the soccer side as well, and it's just an interest of mine. So I do believe that is that's a path that sports performance coaches have to move towards, is truly understanding the sport and the requirements. And you can't, as if anybody follows me on Instagram or Twitter, you'll probably see more of, is you can't talk about conditioning or strength if you don't understand what the requirements of the game are, but even more so if you don't understand what the requirements of the game model are, and how the team wants to play. So I think that's where it has to start. There is a massive push for that in strength conditioning. It might be an echo chamber because the people I surround myself with think that way. And they think of that way in whatever sport they work in. It's not just soccer. The network that I've surrounded myself, shout out to Side Chick, for those that know. It's a group of us who are just around but we see this world similarly, which is, you don't start with strength and then see how it applies to sport. You have to understand, the sport and only work back as far as you need. And I think there is a really big push and a movement towards that at the top levels, but it may take some time to trickle down, and that's kind of the reality of where we're at.
Yeah. So with you saying that is very similar to what Brian Strum used to say, where like the coaches need to be like Walmart and not so much like the outlet malls. Yep. The Walmart, you can go to Walmart and get everything. And the outlet mall, there's different stores for different things. So when you do work in that silo where like this store just does the strength conditioning, this store does the tactics, this store does the recruiting, you allow all that miscommunication to happen. And so the question that he asked Jake Turrell one day was, what happens if a coach leaves? Does it fall apart? Right. And I think that's kind of what you're referring to. Like if the head coach is somewhat knowledgeable in every aspect, if someone leaves, there's not a gap. He can step in, fulfill the role until someone qualified comes in. But when you bring this question up, you get a lot of pushback from people that are in high positions, and this is how we've always done it. And it sounds like a lot of people are just afraid to have conversations.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Again, like I'm gonna keep touting him, and having worked for Jay Vidovich at Pitt, in something that, so our department was Jay as obviously the leader and where everything trickled down from. But we did, in my opinion, what I've seen at Pitt isn't done anywhere else as far as how in college soccer, as far as the disciplines that work underneath the umbrella of Pitt soccer, and he has created that and, gotten the right people in places so that there's a system that it's running from. But Felix Prussell, who is the head of sports science, I'm sure I butchered his title. I'm sorry, Felix. But, he does the sports science at with soccer for the last 3 years, and now he's expanded outwards at Pitt. But when he presents, he always has a slide saying, none of this, we don't decide things and then push it up to Jay. Jay decides things and has questions and has a structure, and you fit into it. And if you don't fit into it, no disrespect, Jay's not going to come to you. You have to fit into what Pitt soccer is, or you're not going to be a part of the staff, or at least an integral part of the staff. So, and that's not a bad thing. It's not him trying to hold everything tight. He just knows that in order for this to function, or any coach should know that in order for this to function correctly, you have to have people who are feeding upwards into a system. And not to mention, Jay has a master's degree in exercise science or sports science, one of the two. Just he would sit on the bike in the weight room before I started working with Pitt, and we would talk, and he's like, yeah, when I was at Leeds 2 years ago, we were talking about this. I went to LAFC last year and talked to the sports performance director, and he talked about, getting high speed running this way. Like, his breadth of knowledge is mind blowing. But he wants the specialists to be able to do that in their role, but it has to feed up towards, what the head coach or, the organization wants. And that for me that's where this has to start, is a head coach knowing enough, or at least knowing what they don't know, and giving out the responsibility to those, and just saying, this is what I need from you. Can you carry it out?
The one thing,
and it also has to do. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The one thing I keep picking up on too is, you said I was in the meetings at San Antonio FC. I was in the meetings at Pitt. That for me sounds like a huge step rather than it's a coach and an assistant coach, and they come out and then we're just going to hand them off to you for 30 minutes or an hour a couple times a week. Just having leadership like that said, hey, come in here, you're going to be a part of the discussion. How big is that for you when you're entering into that kind of, conversation?
Yeah, it's you can't be successful without it. Because then it just creates that division of either you're doing different things than are expected, or, now you're not talking about it because you don't have a chance to sit down and say, like, hey, what did you do there? Or, what do you plan to do in these spaces? Again, I think I've seeked those things out probably more than other coaches do, because, again, I love football. We'd get to the office at Pitt at 6:30 in the morning, and I'd sit through an hour and a half of the tactical and technical talk of what the session was going to be and what's happening at the weekend. And, do I have an incredible amount of input? No. But are those things valuable to understand and to move forward, what the expectations are? 100%. And that was the same at San Antonio for me, underneath Andy, to learn more and how he applied the periodization. And then once he left, to be the person who was guiding the periodization, that you can't not be in the conversations with the coaches as they're planning training. And so that, I find to be incredibly important. And I think it's a huge miss if they're not. Now, in the college game, when you have 4 teams as a strength conditioning coach,
it's the shotgun approach.
Yeah, it's not always possible. And it's not always the fault of the coach, of the strength coach. Sometimes it's just the reality is they don't have the bandwidth to do that every day. And so a friend of mine is a strength conditioning coach, or was, he's moved on since, but was a strength conditioning coach at a Division III university with 18 teams and him and 1 staff member.
Wow.
Him and I are very similar. We see the same way, we see sport the same way. You know, we understand strength conditioning feeds into sport. Like, we are very similar, but the reality is he has to have a very general program. You know, he doesn't have the bandwidth to create and run 18 different programs, let alone, you know, position specific or, you know, within those programs. So I'm not giving an excuse to the strength coaches, but it is a real thing as to why some of the reasons some of those things don't happen. To be really honest, my mentor at Robert Morris University, I came in and I was there for about a year and a half. When I took Soccer's over, he was really hesitant to allow me to be at the pitch as much as I wanted to be and to be in meetings as much as I wanted to be. And I didn't understand why until later on, when I realized that he wasn't worried about me doing it. He was worried that in 4 months when I left, that the next person who came in wouldn't have that interest. And then the coaches would be like, what the hell happened? Excuse my language. Like, what's going on here? And it knew it would just set him up for failure moving forward. So, you know, it is massively important to be in those meetings if you want to actually be a, you know, people talk about like high performance cultures or, you know, having a high performance department where everybody feeds into something and is all moving in the right direction. If you actually want to create that, whichever university says they do, then you need to afford people the time and space to do it, and frankly, the money. But if you're not willing to commit to those things, then you're going to get cookie cutter, and that's just the reality of it.
Let me ask this. It sounded like San Antonio was an amazing setup for you with a great leader and experience. What causes you to make the jump to Pittsburgh, where again, it sounds like a really, really good setup, and now you're at Angel City? Like, what do you kind of hit a point where you're like, you know what, I think I've topped out in terms of what I can learn and bring to the program, and then I move on? Or is it just like, this is what Frank likes to do? I like to go try new things and continue to grow my growth and learning.
Yeah, probably a bit of both. You know, at not necessarily in the way that I've topped out, but you know, just to be really honest, when you're really early on in strength conditioning, you don't make a whole lot of money. So there is also a monetary factor of like, when you're at somewhere for 2 years, sometimes there's like a 80% pay raise somewhere else. And it's not a crazy amount of money. It's just the fact that you've made so little that you can make a lot more somewhere else. That is one reason. I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's not a factor in my career. One of the main reasons to move out of San Antonio is to be closer to family in Pittsburgh. That's just 3 hours away from home for me in Buffalo. And I say that, and then I moved all the way across the country to California. But that was one of the major reasons, as well as, you know, as you said, like, I was in the college game, and then I was like, I'm in soccer, and I love soccer and being in it. And then it was like, okay, what am I missing by just being in soccer? And, you know, that was one of the reasons to get back into the NCAA game, to then realize, oh crap, I really love working in soccer, and trying to move back towards just that. So at my time at Pitt, I was there for 2.5 years. I started out not working with soccer at all, which, you know, was the plan to get me with soccer as soon as possible, but it took about a year. And COVID threw off some of that as well, which was definitely interesting. But, you know, so I went from working with softball and track and swimming and lacrosse, and to then taking over men's soccer during the first fall COVID back, and, you know, be number one in the country for 20 something weeks, which was just unbelievable to be a part of, you know, and make it to the Final Four in the College Cup. And then that summer I had, my boss, Tyler Carpenter, moved to Ohio State for an incredible job opportunity. Along some of the shuffling of the new person coming in, I took over women's soccer as well. So I had men's and women's soccer. It was a great role. But just in reality, it was kind of an unsustainable one as far as time commitments and, you know, the requirements of having 2 in-season teams is madness, because the off days for men's soccer are women's games days, and the off days for women's soccer are men's game days. So it just meant, not in a bad way, but it just meant working 7 days a week. And then having another team on top of that. So I would say it's always been a mixture of, okay, I've learned a lot here, and I see an opportunity where I can have a different experience, not a better or worse, just a different experience. The difference from San Antonio to Pitt was the population that I'd be working with, the sports I'd be working with. I missed working with women, just to be frank. It's a group that I really enjoyed working with, and having just a difference, a different stimulus, not working with like the same people all the time. It's nice to have a couple teams. And then, coming to Angel City, the major thing that really intrigued me was, first of all, the person that brought me in, Rob Udberg, was Chelsea Women's. He was an assistant and performance director at Chelsea Women, and just his is with Emma Hayes, who, is part of the Raymond Verheyen, tree, or however you want to put that. So him and I viewed football the same way. We viewed the starting point as the same way. We could speak the same language and have all that. And then really that I was not a performance coach. I wasn't a soccer coach, but I sat in between the two of those and could kind of mend myself between the two of them. And, I can work on field with the football team, and I can work on field on the conditioning side, and I can also work, across that through rehab and all these other spaces. So it was a really intriguing space for me, and to learn from somebody that, again, I thought I could pick up quite a bit from. And so, yeah, that's that. It's always a bit of like, one of my mentors said, make as much money as early as you can, because it'll help you when you're 30 and 40 and moving forward. So it's not what I move towards, but it's definitely in the back of my mind. But then from there, it's quite a bit of just trying to find different opportunities.
You brought up the want to get back into coaching the female side. What is it like? What are some of the differences when you're dealing with the men's team versus a female team, in terms of, like, do the exercises look different? Does the way you go about developing relationships and setting things up? Because, a lot of people look at men and we're like, we're just angry all the time and want to get after it. What are some of the differences, and why maybe does the female side of things kind of more for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it is one over the other. I love working in both. I got asked this a lot, especially going into NCAA job interviews, of like, you work in the men's game, like, how do you treat men and women differently? And it's like, yes, but I treat men differently than other men, just like I treat women differently than other women. Like, I don't see it as a gender. I treat this gender and this gender. Like, we have some women on our team who, want you to be straightforward with them and tell them exactly what you feel and don't sugarcoat it. And then you have others who need it to be softer approach. I have also worked with men who want things really direct, and others who can't handle direct feedback. So, it's for me, I've heard this question quite a bit, and I don't think it's, I hate to say it's gender based. I don't think it is, but I do think, it's just human based. Try to learn about the people, feel out who they are and how they best receive feedback. And you're probably going to mess up a couple times. But, know that you're going to have to, if you keep delivering it the same way, then, you're probably not equipped to be a coach, if they can't handle it that way. Now, people who work with me might laugh at that, because I am really direct when it comes to conversations with coaches or conversations with other staff members. I'm pretty much going to hammer straight down the line, but I tend to be a little bit more understanding with athletes in trying to find and tote that line. But from the actual technical execution of things, there are obvious differences between men and women in this space, and so there's just different things that you have to be aware of. When it comes to injury risks, when it comes to hormonal differences, when it comes to really just frankly what's happened in the NWSL versus what's happened in other leagues, right? There's massive differences in how you can approach things. But any athlete wants to be coached really hard. They want to know that you want the best for them in their life and in their career, and they want to be better. So if you start there and you do it in a way that people can accept the information, I don't see it as too gendered of a thing.
The other thing that has come up and been a theme throughout is Raymond, Raymond Verheyen. How big of an impact has it been on you? What about it made sense to you? What made you think, you know what, I see what they're saying. It makes sense to me, and now I'm ready to rock and roll and apply it.
Yeah, I probably to my fault, I hate subjective anything. Like I hate anything that is like a feeling. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Along the lines of like, I really like structure. I need things to make sense and to have like logical principles. And so for me, principle-based thinking is massive. And that's where Raymond starts with everything, first of all, what are we trying to accomplish? And that is simply to score one more goal than the other team. And that's it. That's how this starts. It's how it ends. And then from there, what do we need on a football side to do that? And then, okay, if that's the football side, how do we support that so that people can, complete the most football actions for the longest amount of time and be healthy from game 1 till game 40, or however many games you have in your season. And so that as a starting point for me just made so much sense. I've worked in places that have used the football periodization 6-week blocks and the model. I've worked in places that are more tactical periodization based with Vitor Frade and the microcycle of 1 week. A lot of those principles actually overlap in the fact of ramping up and coming back down and understanding the recovery windows and understanding the taper into games. But in reality, those principles are pretty non-negotiable, and the fact that he laid those out in such a clear way for both soccer coaches and performance coaches to understand, that really was the attraction for me. And then obviously the language piece. I am an absolute stickler in my own thing for language. My roommate who just stepped away, we worked together at San Antonio, and underneath Andy, this idea of like, we have to use the same language. We have to be really clear with our language. We can't just say words. They have to mean something. They have to mean the same thing to every person. Like Raymond talks about, the word technique is useless. Like, oh, good technique. Well, what about it was good? What do you mean? What was the touch good? Was the communication good? Was the decision making good? Was the execution good? Was it the position? Was it the moment? Was it the direction? Was it the speed? Like all these things that they have clear definitions. They just make everything more objective and easier to evaluate. So for me, like that's why I think I was Dutch in a former life. Is like I need structure, and I like to be really straightforward with emotion is obviously very, very important, but for me, decisions need to be made logically, not emotionally, and that's for me why Raymond's work just was so important to me in my development.
The other thing you've talked about is, especially at Pitt and even at San Antonio, is the person at the top is running the show and everything trickles down. How do you get that first initial conversation so you can become part of the trickle down? And then where do you fit in that pyramid, per se, that you can now start working and making an impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be dependent upon the coach or who is at the top. Some are going to be more like, this is what we're doing and find a way to come in. Others are going to be, hey, this is what I want. I want you to fit into this, but I want you to do it in your way, and be a little bit more hands off. And I don't think either is better or worse. I just think they're different. But for me, I think it's really important to be able to ask pointed questions and get really clear answers, in the way of, how do you want to play? What to you is a fit player as a right back? What do you expect that they can do for 90 minutes? Are we expecting that our right back is going to be up into the line of 5 once we have maintained possession into the final third? Or is it that we're sticking with a bank of 4 no matter what, and we're not expecting them to overlap or to join the attack? That very much changes what the expectation is of me. in how I prepare that player. So that's one, is asking really pointed questions about what do you need each of your players to do. If there's a game model document, it makes it pretty easy. Everything's right there in front of you. You go, okay, in this moment of the game, in attack, this is what the player's asked to do. This is what the unit's asked to do. This is what the team is asked to do. In defense, in the defensive moments of the game, this is what they're asked to do. In attacking transition, defensive transition. When those things are laid out, it becomes quite easy to, bless you, you're welcome. When those things are laid out, it becomes really easy to understand and decipher what those things are. The other question I think is important to be asked is, what does it look like for me to train that player? Because frankly, some coaches are pretty old school and want you to run them. That means there's not a football involved. And the expectation is that is how things are done. Do I agree with that? No. But is it my place to disagree or agree with that? No. It's the head coach's decision on what they want. And that's a question I'll ask in the interview process. I'm not going to wait until I get here to ask that question. But, it's, for me, is how much can we do with the ball so that it's football action based and there's communication, decision making, execution, in that it's specific to what they're going to be required to do. So I think those are some two really easy initial questions that could come from a performance coach or a conditioning coach upwards in order to make that relationship much easier. The fact is, what does it look like if your players are fit? Which doesn't mean that they get a 40 on the beep test. It means they can complete the actions for 90 minutes. And then really, how do we plan to execute that? Also from a training standpoint, what does training look like? If you're Carlo Ancelotti and every day is a tactical session, then you're probably going to have to run a little bit or provide conditioning exercises with the ball that are a little less specific to the game model. If you're Bielsa and every Wednesday it's 11v11 for 18 minutes and there's a ball lying in the sideline, you're probably not running too much outside of that. It's built into the football training. And that is really important to say, if we get the practice week right, there's probably not a whole lot of extra that needs to happen except for the players who are not in the team. Or you prioritize the technical and tactical and you don't prioritize the conditioning. So the conditioning may have to be separate. And that's not better or worse. It's just different. Those two are just different. So having an understanding of what the training sessions will look like and the structure of the week is incredibly informative to what you're going to get moving forward. So those three are super, super important. And then, in San Antonio, it was the periodization and the training structure was delivered by Andy. It was Darren was the head coach, but Andy was the, I want to say assistant head coach, but again, titles and me just don't get along. I don't remember anything. But he was also the performance director. So he had a dual role in which he, laid out the periodization, but also was a coach, was a football coach. And so, those two roles allowed for more of this is what we're doing periodization wise, rather than in my current role is going to the head coach and saying, what are your non-negotiables that you need during training week? Every week, no matter what, these are what we need to get in. What are your, hey, we have to do 5v5s to be competitive. At some point during the week, I'd love to see a 5v5 so we can, get more actions in and have a competitive environment where they're getting towards goal and getting shots off and scoring goals and everybody celebrating. Great. I need to make sure that fits into the week. That now doesn't fit into Raymond's 6-week block. You can make it happen, but you may need to modify some things in order for that to fit into the training structure. So it's really important. I started with another question, but that's the one where I would really start is, what does your training look like? And then, again, what is it to be fit for your game style and how do you want me to do it?
So just to touch back on that. So you mentioned that the setting in and listening to the training week and how that load looks like. I know that at the high school level that I was at, and I know Karen's kind of concerned about this as well, and at the collegiate level with me, like those conversations never happened. It was just, here's your set time, you go in there, you're with me. And what we unfortunately experienced is, we had guys that, trained and then they had lifting, and the lifting coaches didn't know what we did at training. We didn't know what they were doing in there because there was no communication. And our guys sprinted at training for 45 minutes, and then they go in there and do hamstrings. And now all of a sudden our guys' hamstrings are weak for the rest of the week in training. And there's just a breakdown. So can you just talk about like how the accumulation of fatigue can affect everything over the length of the week, and that if there is no communication between the coaches, ultimately the coaches are responsible for the injuries, because we're the ones that should be relaying information back and forth.
Yeah, I that last comment that you made is an incredibly important framing, which is coaches are responsible for injuries. Athletic trainers aren't responsible for injuries. Strength coaches aren't responsible for injuries. The coaches are responsible for injuries. And I say that in a way of not to put blame on anybody, but to say that like that's where everything needs to start from, right? Is the communicate, as you said, the communication needs to be had across all these departments, and it needs to make sure that everybody's fitting in. And if they're not, then like somebody's got to be to blame. Or if that person has gone against the wishes of the head coach, that person's to blame. And as you said, like, well, we didn't win this weekend. Is that person fired now? Like that is complicated, right? It's not lost on me. It's not lost on me, but it is honestly, it's a hesitation of a lot of soccer coaches to work with strength and conditioning departments. So I do believe that the strength coach has to fit into the structure of the week that is happening for the sport, of whatever sport it is. You have to marry those things up. I tend to like stack stimuli on, so I would rather listen, if we're doing a high-speed running day, I'd probably rather do the hamstrings on that day, but in appropriate loads, right? We're not just going to go like, 3x12 on the RDLs, here we go, give it a shot. But knowing that if I do it the day before and then they go to sprint, well, now they're probably fatigued from the hamstring work, and now they're going to sprint, and there comes the sniper from the top row to get the hammy. And we don't want that either. But again, the communication of it is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. And for me, that means the head coach has to be really clear with their training. They also have to stick to the training. And if they don't stick to the training, they have to communicate it on the day.
Because there's always the ripple down effect.
Right. So, again, Felix would put this in all his presentations. He would do, and it was a really important note, was at University of Pittsburgh, they have training in the morning. I was always at training, but for some reason, say I wasn't, or maybe in my first year where I had another team that conflicted, I wasn't able to go every day. The reality was I knew that the game day -3 was this, right? And that was when we would try to get our lifts in. Let's use that as an example. I knew that for the most part, I could get this stimulus X of strength work in on that, and it not have a negative effect for the players. I knew that by starting really, really low with volume and slightly increasing volume really, really slowly, and making sure that there were no adverse effects, right? At a certain point, this is more of some experience, where there's no need to go any higher. You're getting the stimulus you want. The players are improving. But at the same time, Felix had Catapult and all of the information that would come in, and he would send me a text right as the session ended up and would say, hey, we got a little more than we expected today on the training pitch. Like we weren't getting what we wanted out of the exercise. So we went a little bit longer. Like just know that the guys are going to come in a little more fatigued than expected. All that means is for me is I just cut off some volume. The fact is the strength or the football work on pitch is so much more important to being able to score one more goal than the opposition than me doing an extra set of RDLs. Like it's not even comparable. You can't even come close to thinking that they're the same. But at the same time, you don't want to do that every week and just say like no strength training ever, because we always do too much on the pitch. You have to have a balance so that we can keep players healthy and give them a stimulus to continue to improve. But if it's one of those moments where they go, hey, we overcooked them today, it might mean they come in and they do some mobility work and they go away. Like I know that's something you brought up, Jake Tura and Brian Schrum. Like that was something that I think Jake, through his time working with Brian, was like, it's kind of, they use the red pill, blue pill analogy of the Matrix all the time, right? Like you finally took the other pill and you're like, damn, like this strength stuff doesn't really matter.
So that was going to be my next question is like, because when you're working with the strength coach trying to develop a time to lift, like especially in the college setting, we played every Wednesday, Sunday, and we had to have a day off during the week. So usually there's recovery days because we have so many games in a short window. And then also, they want the guys in the gym. So it's like, well, should they go in before training, but then that could potentially affect training, or do they go after training? But then, the strength coaches are out there in the evenings because it's after class and after training. So then we're just having the conversations of like, we'll just send them in there and leave them alone because that's the appropriate time.
Yeah, that's probably more of an organizational.
It's not
problem.
A perfect environment.
Yeah, but
it's not a perfect world, but
right.
Communication.
That's
where it starts, right?
I think so at San Antonio, just we would bring the guys in every morning before the session, and they would do something in the gym for 5 to 20 minutes, depending on what day it was. And then we'd go out into the pitch, we'd finish out a more specific warm up, and then they'd play. They'd go into the training session. On one of the days per week, we wouldn't do it in the morning and we would do it after, and it would be more of the strength stimulus. Yeah. The reality is it was just me. I was on the pitch every day. That environment was more conducive to a really specific stimulus. In that way, you're lucky when you only have one team. But that was, for me at Pitt, the best time to work with the women was before training on the pitch. So we bring out med balls. I'd bring out, 8 sets of dumbbells. We would do loaded jumps. We would do specific hamstring and groin work and quad work every warm-up session. Nothing that would be fatiguing, but enough of a stimulus to provide something to move forward. And we would try to get some power work through our loaded jumps, our sprints, and our med ball throws. Is it perfect? No, but it was useful and we were really healthy. I don't think it was just because of what we did, but I think it would have been worse had we tried to say, all right, we got 1 day a week, hour in the weight room, try to get everything in one day. It's just not conducive, especially the college season where you're playing every 3 to 4 days. It's just not conducive to being able to do that, to have one session of it for an hour. It's much more conducive to do 15 to 20 minutes every day and be really consistent with it. I definitely, I live on more of the, I'm more of like the robust side of things rather than I want to be, super optimal in our training. Like I want things to be super, super robust so that you can do it almost every day and it not have a negative effect.
One of
the things that
Go ahead, Tyler.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask.
I was just going to say.
We got the delay.
Dang it, man.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, so you've kind of been talking about the in-season look. How does that differ once we get to the off-season and like even the preseason? Are you working with them more, or is there more of a push to just have like you just go play and I'll still work with you maybe once a week or what have you? I know it's maybe a different at the professional level. Maybe they go off and spend time with family and all that. But even at like Pitt and at UNC and Robert Morris, what does the off season look like? Do we need to have them in the gym more than what they were before, or what's the balance that you get there?
Yeah, I'll speak to the environment I'm in currently, and then I'll speak to the NCAA. Currently, gave them 2 to 3 weeks off towards the end of their season, and then I sent home an off-season program. Right now, it is as general as could possibly be. There's nothing position specific. There's nothing really specific to football conditioning. It's really general. Like, don't think about football for a little bit if you don't want to. Here's something that can prepare you for what will prepare you for preseason, if that makes sense. We also have about 6 athletes who are in location, and so that means they'll come and they've requested some technical work from the technical staff. So they get to come in, work for 45 minutes on some pretty specific stuff that they want to work on, nothing as structured as a team session, and then they'll come in and lift with me after that session. So the football sessions are significantly less demanding from a physical perspective, which means that I am able to provide a lot more volume than I normally would, than I ever could in season, as a way to start to push some of those physical boundaries that, frankly, you just don't really have time, or it's just not worth the risk to do in season. So that's kind of what we look like now. As we move towards January, my assumption is that there will be a lot more athletes in location because it's LA in January, and why wouldn't you want to be in LA? And so that means we'll have the opportunity to do quite a bit more training during that time and more specific prep towards the preseason, which starts in February. On the NCAA side, it's all over the place, right? They come back in January, and you have about 4 weeks before you're really allowed to do football with them, right? You're not able to train right away. So that time would be strength work, right? Take your strength work, give them EPEs and some exposures to some high-speed running, so that when they start to play again, they're not completely destroyed. And then, for me, I would see it as in what I don't know if I'm selling out Pitt here, but you would provide them some parameters for like some pickup exercises that they could do together, right? So that they're still preparing for how they're expected to train soon, but you're not overloading it because you're not coaching it, and you're not pushing the football conditioning of trying to get them to complete another action. And then, you have your spring season that now runs from February until end of April, somewhere around that.
Yeah.
End of April, right? So you have that period where, again, that's an in-season period. They're training 4 days a week, 5 days a week. They're playing, at least at the Division I level, I think it's 3 game days or 4 game days, something along those lines.
Yeah, we had 4.
Yep. So you have that, and then after that, they've gone through almost the same length of season they do in the fall, which is crazy because how short the length of season is in the fall. And then they have a little bit of time off. You give them, again, some pretty generalized training. And then we were really lucky, starting with the men's side. And then when I took over the women's side too, we had everybody in starting in June. The whole team came in June. So we were able to have 6 to 8 weeks of prep before preseason. And for us, obviously the coaches cannot work with the players at that time. So I would go out. Everybody would have their catapult bras on at the time. That was what we used. But regardless, I would run them through, a warm up, some specific work for like hamstring and prep for sprinting. And then on the men's side, Jay or the staff, there would be, again, just this thought of, here are some exercises that you could potentially do, because this is what it's going to look like in the season. It's not like you're running this exercise, but like, here are some ideas. And then I would, because from a safety standpoint, I would run a stopwatch of how long the exercise should be, just as a way to prepare them for what they're going to be expected to do in preseason. We know how rough these college preseasons can be. 2 weeks, but not even 10 days before your first game is when you start. So the fact that we had that lead in was massive. On the women's side, we did the same thing. We had 6 weeks. I provided more of the structure. The 6 weeks set up really, really well to run Raymond's 6-week, football periodization block, and, go through the undulations of the field sizes. And, we did 4 days So 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on. And again, we just ran through, like I gave them a menu. So here's get a passing exercise, put one together. Here are the spaces I want you to do it. Here's the amount of time I want you to do it. I'd start the watch. Hey, it's an overload day. In week 1, we're going to do 2 times 10 minutes of 11v11. Hey, we have 26 girls or 26 women on the team. That means 4 of you are running one of the intervals on the outside for 5 minutes and then swapping back in for 5 minutes. But we were really progressive. We had really progressively loaded them in the way that they were prepared for preseason. They weren't starting preseason playing soccer for the first time and everybody's getting hurt. So whether I got lucky or I got it right, I don't know. But, it was an incredibly healthy team that was fit, and not only was fit for game 1, was fit and healthy towards the end of the year as well, which is really, really hard to do in college soccer, especially with most teams showing up the day before preseason. And it's like, all right, I hope y'all did the packet. And I hope the packet was good, because most of the time you don't even know if it's good. So yeah, I was really lucky in the fact that people were here and people wanted to play soccer. When I say here, I meant at Pitt, and the expectations were set from the coaches of like, hey, we're going to pay for you to be here. We're some of you can take classes, but in reality, like, come be a part of this, be prepared. And if not, that's okay. But this is what's going to prepare you best for the season.
You brought up earlier too the idea of, like, even when you're at Pitt, when you first got there, you were talking about swimming and lacrosse and like all these, and you talked about how some coaches, because of time constraints and only having, like, it's just you, especially like for me at the high school level, we have one strength and conditioning coach for the entire program. What are some things that maybe I, as the head coach of, the soccer team, what can I do to help that person out? Do I take on more of the responsibility of the strength and conditioning? Or is that something that, like you've talked about, the big communication piece where we kind of have to work through that?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to approach it. I think one way would be to go to them and say, here's what I need. I understand that you may not have the bandwidth to do this, but I really appreciate your expertise because I don't know how to do it. Is there a way in which you can, provide me with some expertise and how to essentially lay this out, right? How can I do this if I want to do it every day and I want to do it with some lower volume so that they can still play every day? Like, what would that look like if you could do it? I know you can't, but what would it look like if you could? And then maybe it's that conversation, or it's them creating that and then saying, okay, I know you can't do this every week. Could you come week 1 and do it for the players, do it for me, and then I don't need to see you for 4 weeks. Go away. We'll do it. We got it. I understand you can't do it, but like, I need your help. And then you have the bandwidth to do it. Even if it's 5 minutes at beginning of every session, it's better than not doing 5 minutes at the beginning of every session and then them going and tearing their hamstrings because they're doing an hour away from you. So I think that's one way to go about it. The second one is say, hey, I actually really want the players to be in with you, but there's no way that we can do an hour because the last time that they've done this, or the last 3 times they did this, I got nothing out of them on the pitch for 2 days, right? Whatever happened. Like, what can we do? Because I want to send them to your environment. I think it's important that they're in there. I think it's important that they get that education, especially, youth players. I think it's really important that they see that, because the expectation in the university setting is they're probably going to have to do it. And even if they don't play college soccer, it's a good life skill to have, right? And that's probably what most youth strength coaches will argue. Like, they need to get strong. They need to learn these things. It's great. Then, like, what can we do to pull back the intensity so that the players aren't sore, so that the players are still getting better, but like, they can still be in that environment and succeed. So I would probably go about it in the first way, because I think you almost humble yourself as a coach when you, like, that's what I've always been, I still struggle with, but I've always been taught when having these interactions is like, go in acting like you know nothing and just like begging for help, and they'll probably be much more willing to help you. And then finding a way that they can still do what they need, but in a way that fits into making the players better and healthier, because that's the most important part, healthy and fit. So I would say that would probably be the way I would approach it. But in the end of the day, you know, you're probably going to have to make a decision, and it's going to be influenced by, you know, the school you work at and the athletic director and all these other things on if you want to continue moving forward with working with that coach or not, if they're not willing to do those things. Sometimes it's out of your control, and they say you have to work with that strength coach, and now you have to find a way to make it work that you can keep people healthy.
You mentioned healthy and fit. One of the things too that you see a lot out there is injury prevention. This is going to help keep, you know, girls' ACL stronger and all that type of stuff. Is injury prevention, is that just kind of a thing that we like to throw out there? I mean, you know, what's your take on, like, this is an ACL program, or this is a hamstring program, or all these types of things that people like to put out there?
Oh God, it's a hard one to answer. Injury prevention doesn't exist. Injury mitigation through proper loading and appropriate exercises does exist. You can't say like that set of RDLs saved their hamstrings. You can't say that jump with a trap bar made their ACL better, you know, or less susceptible to injury. But I've swung the pendulum a couple times in my career already of like, strength is stupid, strength is everything. And I'm kind of like, it's in the middle at this point. And maybe I'm still more on the strength is stupid side. But I think that Raymond talks about freshness versus fitness. Like, cool, we got them to think of it on the muscular level. We got their muscles really ready to accept all this load and all this force, and you know, their hamstring is like, it's all long and it's super strong, but then it's so fatigued that they pull it when they first try to sprint. That's an issue. So if you're doing that, that's a problem. If you're providing them enough strength work that they are getting more robust by strengthening the musculature and putting them in correct positions, then, but it's not affecting football, then better. That's the optimal. That's what we need to move towards. I've seen it at places where there's no strength work done, and like, it's apparent that there's not been any strength work done. But I've also seen it where they go into the weight room 3 days a week and they are useless. So you need to find the middle ground for me. But I do think, you know, injury mitigation through, you know, appropriate training does exist. I hate to say injury prevention because some things are out of your control, but I think it is an appropriate part of any organization and any football team, is that, you know, you have somebody who has an expertise to make those people better. And for me, sometimes that means lifting a weight. Sometimes it means sprinting and making sure they're really, like, they can accept the load that you are expected to give them throughout the week and during games. And I would err more on the side of that than the side of weight room, but the weight room needs to exist at certain points in the year.
If we were to look ahead, you've made some, like, it's an awesome experiences at all stops along the way. If I said, hey, Frank, what's the perfect ideal place for you? Are you looking, would you love to be at like maybe a Premier League or MLS or like higher level, maybe going over with, you know, now you've got that connection with Emma Hayes, like going over and working with the Chelsea FC women's type program? Where, or are you kind of like, you know, I'm going to continue to learn, continue to enjoy what I'm doing and see where things go?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot as a staff. So it's funny that it's brought up. Like, we say, like, what's your mountaintop, right? Like, what would be the mountaintop for you? Shout out Dan Ball, close friend who asked this question. I don't know if I have one. I don't know if there's like, I would love to be here. I'm a big AS Roma supporter. I could never work for Roma because I would hate that it might be ruined for me. So it definitely wouldn't be that, right? It wouldn't be a club like that. But just in general, I think whether it's in the club environment, whether it's, moving away from the club environment and working in the education side, and something that's another thing that I've thought about moving towards, of like, I find the most value when I'm speaking to coaches and speaking to medical professionals and trying to get people to speak the same language and be able to do this. Maybe that's an avenue I move forward in 10 years or 10 days or 10 months, who knows, but or it's being the best I can be at whatever environment is asked of me on the sports side. So I don't really have a mountaintop that I'm like looking towards. Like, I want to be with the U.S. national team at a World Cup. That's not really in my thought process. But I'm willing to accept any of the opportunities if I believe that they're the right place and we can all speak the same language, and really that I can make the environment better is the most important one for me.
Something else you said earlier was, I have surrounded myself with like-minded, like strength and conditioning coaches or coaches in general who have similar thought processes in terms of where you're at. And I've just completely drew a blank on what the heck I was going to ask. I don't. What the hell was it? It was going to be a good one.
They always are.
They always have it.
This is it. So you have surrounded yourself with all of these like-minded coaches in terms of how they go about, like, kind of the top down, incorporating strength and conditioning into the mix. But the one thing that I've enjoyed about you is you're building this kind of network for yourself personally, but you have your own website, you share programs, you constantly on Instagram are sharing things. Why do that? Why is it important, do you think, for you personally to continually put out and have, like, you've dropped probably 10 plus names already about people that have impacted you. Your roommate is someone that you connected with back at San Antonio, and here you are still connected with him. How important is it for you to continue to try to educate and get that information out, like in little setups like what we're having right now?
Yeah, I've just been so lucky. It's not lost on me how lucky I've been to work with the people I work with. Like I shouted out a group of strength coaches that I talk to every day. I was having a beer in San Antonio with some guy who I'd never met, and he's like, "Man, I should add you to this group." And they've been some of my, like, it's funny I talk about, they've been some of my closest friends who I've not met, who we just talk on Instagram every day. But I've been really, really lucky to be surrounded by some really, really incredible people. Also, I think a lot of training is really, really bad. And I don't want to see really, really bad training anymore. I don't want to see really, really bad periodization. I don't want to see these things because I think it negatively impacts the game. I think it negatively impacts my career field. I think it negatively impacts, people's lives. You have 15-year-olds who are getting injured because of incompetency from coaches, and that may ruin their careers. It may ruin their lives moving forward, or set their lives in a different direction than what was planned originally. So, selfishly, I like people thinking I'm smart. So every once in a while I'll share stuff. That's one of the reasons. Two, I sometimes like to make money. So that's the second reason. But mostly it's I don't make a lot of money off any of that stuff. But I do like to put them out, mostly so that we can try to move the needle in the direction of good training. Because I think it's really important that people have reasons for what they're doing, and those are sound reasons, and really we can keep people healthy. That's the biggest one for me. I've just seen so many injuries just straight out of incompetency. So if somebody can see a free post on Instagram and they get some value out of it, like I had a preseason post last year that like kind of blew up right at the right time, and it was just like, wow, the amount of people who are going to see Raymond's principles for preseason just because I made a stupid graphic with 6 slides, like that is huge. They're probably never going to buy football periodization. It's just not going to happen. Most of that information was parroted from his book. That's like I wrote that in the comments, so I don't feel too bad. But like the fact that information is just going to be shared simply because it's on Instagram is great. So hopefully people keep searching for good information. They can see through some of the BS of some of the stuff shared on social media and some of the old ways of coaching, and that they can really just try to be better.
Talking about the Instagram feed and all that, what are some ways that people can connect with you and follow your journey?
Yeah. On Instagram, which is probably where I'm most active, is at coach_Frank B. I also have a Twitter. I'm much less active on that, but I try, which these guys tried to say by trying to try to get me scheduled through Twitter. I missed the first 3 messages. But yeah, through there, you guys can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'll try to respond to as much stuff on there. And then my website is coachfrankb.com, which, again, if anybody wants to reach out to me there, more than happy to. You can find my email on that website as well. Yeah, I'm always open to these conversations, always open to answering questions as much as I can. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me on any of those.
This has been awesome. And I'll share all that stuff in the description notes. I'll shut this thing down. This is Kieran with Coach's Corner Chats with co-host Tyler Wickham and guest and coach Frank Barone. I'm out. Peace.